if you want to join and see the class, that's more than welcome. Otherwise, you're happy to also go and do other work that I'm sure that you're busy with.
Yeah, so. Well, maybe I'll sit and stay and watch for a bit as well. Yeah, okay.
Happy for it.
All right.
No worries.
Yeah. And how long have you been in Linear?
For a year now.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So you're fairly new there then.
Yeah, exactly. So I came over, I was living in Sydney before.
Right, okay.
I came over to Perth and...
it's a bit of a different, is it a bit more slow paced over here in Perth compared to Sydney? No, not that different?
I mean, it's slow paced in terms of being a smaller city and stuff, but work-wise I'm enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, oh good. Yeah, I think Perth's a pretty nice city, but I'm pretty biased. I grew up here.
I love the weather, so...
yeah.
I'm originally from Brazil. And
are you? Right, okay. I thought with the name and the accent,
But lived in Sydney for, what is it now, 8 years now. Lived before that in Germany for 5 years. And
right.
Before that a couple of years in France, 7.5 years in Sweden. So I've
been all over the place.
Japan for half a year. So.
Yeah. Always doing like clinical trials work? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, right, so you've got a lot of experience.
Well, except Sweden, which was during my childhood. So.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But apart from that, only clinical research and drug development space. So.
Oh, right, so you have a lot of experience. Well, that's perfect for the students. I hope they might not ask any questions.
Well, I hope they do.
Yeah, sometimes at the end they might come up and ask a question, so yeah.
All right, should we, can I start or should...
Wait till it hits 11, but and then you can start.
All right.
Yeah, I'll take a start.
Sure. All right, so I think we are up to get started. You hear me well? Or do I need to increase volume or anything? No? All right. So my name is Rodrigo Torres and I work for Linear Clinical Research. I don't know if you have heard about Linear before, but Linear is a non-for-profit organization and belongs to the Harry Perkins Institute, which is our parent company that founded us, to Peter Lehman and Peter Richmond. So Linear has been around since 2010, has delivered over 400 clinical trials since 2010, and that's what we're going to speak about. Today is about clinical trials. Myself, was just telling Liz, I'm now here in Perth since a year, lived before that in Sydney, have lived in Germany for 5 years, lived up in Japan for half a year. I have lived in France for a couple of years. I'm originally from Brazil, so that's probably where my accent comes from. So to start off, my colleague Zelda and I prepared this slide deck about clinical trials, and perhaps as a starting point, I wanted to hear from you, what do you know about clinical trials? What rings a bell, what it is, and yeah?
Testing new drugs.
Testing new drugs, yes, that's definitely something we do in clinical trials. Anything else? One more? Too shy for the moment? All right. So, a little bit of what we're going to discuss today, which is a little bit of innovation that's happening in clinical research. So yes, it has to do with testing new drugs, testing new methodology. We're going to speak about clinical trials, what it is, and which stakeholders are involved in the drug development process. What is the drug development process? How much does it cost? How long does it take? All those answers we're going to discuss today in the next 40 minutes or so. And what is happening in terms of innovation. I mean, all other industries, you're seeing a lot of technology coming up. In the banking industry, you do everything by mobile devices or tablets and stuff. Can you do that with clinical research? We're going to discuss a little bit about that. What is the role of a pharmacist that you can play in this industry or in this sector if you wish to? So there are some alternatives for all of you and all of us to play in this industry. And we'll wrap this up looking at what does patients tell about clinical trials and what is their experience about it. So one big differentiator to start with in terms of clinical research and clinical trials is that either it can involve participants, volunteers, or patients. And so that sits on one side of the spectrum. And then the other side is all the professionals and the team that are involved in delivering it. And we're going to speak about when is it volunteers, when is it patients that you're going to conduct clinical trials with. So a little bit of what clinical trials results lead to, and has to do with what the colleague there mentioned about discovering new drugs. But also it can be new clinical procedures that are discovered, or tools that you can use. And not only drugs, it can be medical devices as well. Or a lot of it answers questions or raises new questions to researchers and developers. So if one study functions or it doesn't function, it raises the bar of saying, okay, this didn't work, let's try this thing instead, or this worked, great, can we try something which is better? So one example of that is if you are conducting a clinical trial for a new drug, what would you see as the most important in the discovery of a new medicine? What are you concerned about when you go to a GP and they prescribe you a medication? What is most important for you? Safety. Yes? So that's the primary importance of a clinical trial as well. It has to be safe. And that is something that goes along the whole drug development process. The other piece is, and we're going to speak about when we speak about the stakeholders, you need to do something that is proven to be either better, safer, or less side effects than what is in the market. So sometimes you compare either with what's called placebo. If there is no drug for that, you compare, does it even improve? Basically, then you're doing nothing. Or you compare it directly with a competitor or with another molecule that is in the market right now to say, do you have less safety events? It can be a headache, it can be a stomach problem, it can be a lot of different pieces. But it has to be ethically, so the benefits have to benefit the risks of delivering a clinical trial. So speaking about some of the stakeholders here, so a clinical trial usually has a sponsor. I mean, we all now have just gone past COVID, hopefully, and key sponsors are, for instance, for COVID vaccine, Pfizer that we have heard about, Moderna, AstraZeneca's, just Glaxo, for different type of drugs or different type of molecules. But it can also be new discovery from a scientist. We have a lot of those. We are partnering with a scientist in UWA to do further studies called the PERF trial that Linear is conducting. They have all others, what is called investigator-initiated trials that they get some funding either from the government or from collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry to develop something at some stage and are conducting those studies. Another important stakeholder are participants. So you usually start testing, and we're going to go through the phases of a clinical trial in a small sample of population. So you do your pre-clinical trials, which are all the studies and discovery that you do before you do with humans with animals. They can be with rats, they can be with larger animals like cats, dogs, monkeys, and bigger animals before you conduct actually a clinical trial in humans. And you start with volunteers usually for instance, except if you are in oncology space, but you do start with volunteers with a small sample to see if it works or not. And then you move to a larger spectrum, and then when you have enough data, it can bring to the market, and we can go to the chemist and buy the medications, and the GPs or doctors can prescribe them. So participants and patients are a big piece there. The healthcare team, that can be both linear team, for instance, we are healthcare providers, it can be physicians, it can be nurses, it can be assistants, administrative staff, it can be project managers, pharmacists, all of them are the healthcare team involved. As I mentioned, the clinical trials has to be ethically proven to have the benefits better than the risks. So there are ethics committees worldwide, including Australia, but worldwide, that have a committee that evaluates if that protocol, what is intended to do in a clinical trial, is really something that the benefits are better than the risks to the participants or to the patients. And of course, one of the key elements of a clinical trial, or for a participant and patient participation, is for them to sign an informed consent form, where they have described what are the benefits as well as what are the risks and alternatives that that participant or that patient really have them participating on a clinical trial. There are numerous vendors. So one important vendor, Path West, for instance, to do blood sampling. So you're going to test some bloods, urine samples. There are logistic vendors, so you need to transport the samples somewhere else to be analyzed. So there are multiple vendors. You need to capture the data, and we're going to speak a little bit more about that once we speak about different type of clinical trials, hybrid decentralized clinical trials. We're more in an innovative space in that regards as well. And then there are the regulatory agencies, like for instance here in Australia you have the TGA, in the US you have the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which is mentioned there. In Europe you have the EMA. So each country have their own regulatory agency that approves that the clinical trial can also be conducted. So they usually are the ones that are informed about what type of drug the participant or the patient will be taking, and usually this is centralized somewhere in the globe and distributed to the different sites where the studies will be conducted. So they are also an important stakeholder in a clinical trial space. So let's speak about drug development. And one of the key aspects of delivering studies or in the clinical trial space is that discovery stage until you start developing the molecule, until it hits the market, it takes between 10 to 15 years. So it's long. It's not something that you get overnight. And that's one of the aspects that, except if you have some unique cases, like COVID was a unique case, where we were able really to develop a vaccine that worked and works in a much shorter time frame. But then all those stakeholders that I was speaking about before, they have to work together and say, we're going to focus on this to make sure that we get this much faster than what it usually takes, which is, as I mentioned, 10 to 15 years. And that's how really the COVID vaccine were able to come to the market much earlier than those timelines. It involves more or less 25 to 30 clinical trials to get one of those molecules out in the market, and that's why the cost of development is so high. So in terms of drug discovery and all of those, it starts with, as mentioned here, 10,000 compounds. When you hit the preclinical development stage, which is the stage that I was talking about in terms of animals, that you start testing, well, this didn't work out, this didn't work out, this worked. You already funnel this down to around 250 compounds. Then out of those, only 5 compounds go to clinical development, and as written there, The valley of death is known because most of those compounds don't reach even what's called the phase 3, the larger scale studies there that is mentioned, because it seems that they don't work when it comes to humans. It worked perfectly with animals, but humans didn't work. And that's where you get one compound out there. So you start very high, and there's a lot of research being done in order to develop it, and you end up with one compound being out in the market. So if you look at a chemist or a pharmacy, you have a lot of drugs, so you can imagine how many compounds there were there to begin with before to have that availability across multiple therapeutic areas. And there is a huge investment in delivering those compounds out to the market. But another aspect which is much more important than the investment is the quality of life that you get to the patient out of it. So you had mentioned about safety, but for instance, at Linear we are conducting probably right now around 100 clinical trials in oncology, and just to extend their quality of life, or for them to be able to see their daughter, their grandson to graduate, or a birthday, that's very fulfilling, and that's one of the pieces that drives organizations like Linear to be so dedicated into clinical research. As I mentioned, we are a non-for-profit organization, so there is no, let's say, we are very for purpose, but we are a non-for-profit organization and very much mission driven, especially in the oncology space. We're seeing around 200 new patients, oncology patients every year. Probably going to increase this by end of this year to around the 300 mark in terms of patients that are able to have clinical research or clinical trials as a care option of new innovative molecules that are in the process of being brought to the market. So a little bit of the drug development process there in terms of, again, you start with your discovery. So those are the compounds. There is a lot of research just behind us here in terms of the Harry Perkins Institute looking at molecules and see where does it work, inflammatory diseases and all kind of pieces. Once you think you have a compound that works in a particular method, you go to the preclinical research, which is all the pieces around trying to see if that works for animals. So you're not trying in the pre-discovery, in the discovery stage, you're not trying to find a solution, you're trying to find a methodology. That's the important piece. All right? So then you go to your preclinical piece, which is the animals part, and then you start conducting your studies in humans, which are the clinical trials, and then you get, if that works, which we saw up there, which is one compound in 10,000, that works, you say to the regulatory authorities or agencies like the FDA, TGA, or EMA, saying, I have now a dossier package of data of 30 different studies that I have done. This molecule is safe and it has more benefits than what's out there in the market. Can I get that approved to launch it in the market so patients or the population like us can go to the chemist and buy it? So they are the ones that approve all the drugs that are available for us to buy. A little bit of what is a clinical trial itself. So usually you have a protocol and you believe that you have a concept in that protocol of that molecule that, let's say, will get better your headache. And you want to test this into a clinical trial to see if that one is better, faster, or less side effects than what's currently in the market. So you start off with saying, well, which markets do I want to go to? Do I want to come to Australia? Do I want to go to the US? Do I want to go to Europe, China, Japan, Latin America, Africa, you name it, right? And then you start a study visibility, okay, which centers, which clinical research units, like Linear here, or Harry Perkins or TKI, can conduct those clinical trials. And then you speak with them and say, well, I'm planning with this headache study and I want to test it with volunteers. So are you able to do this? Do you have the facility? And Linear will say, well, yes, we have a facility here in linked to the Charles Gardner Hospital, and we have another one up in Joondalup that conduct healthy studies with healthy volunteers. This is our experience of over 400 studies. Do you want also to conduct it here with us? And then you do the submission process, and they say, well, yes, Linear is great, and we are aiming to do your study with you. I was actually on the phone just before coming here with a potential client that was discussing about a vaccine study for HIV, for instance. And we were at a conversation about how to deliver this study here in Perth. And they were in the US, so that's why it started early. So I had an early start this morning and explained our facilities and how we were going to operationalize the study for them. So then you can move on to the study startup piece that may vary between 6 to 12 weeks. That is usually what it takes to start up here in Australia. We are having the protocol ready until you can have the first participant screened in the process. It takes more or less 40 to 50 days. So you have to set up the vendors, you need to speak with the vendors, who is going to be your pharmacy, who is going to do your samples, all of that. You have to import the IP, which is the investigational product, to be tested. All of that takes between 6 to 12 weeks until you can do it. Then you have the execution, and I put there 6 months to 5 years. That's a very big range, right? Because some studies, like say oncology studies, they can last for 3, 4, 5 years. You're testing something, if the survival rate is higher with this particular molecule than what it is in the market. So you compare both drugs. So it can take, cardiovascular studies is another example, that can take to enroll until you close the data, and all of that can take a long time. There are some smaller studies, like I said, the healthy volunteer studies, they're usually short because the amount of participants is very low. Usually it's done only in one country, in one unit. So that tends to take, the execution part tends to be quite short. But global large phase 3 studies that I was speaking about, which are global in nature, they tend to take a long time, up to 5 years or so, until you get all that data. Then you have to close, which means basically, well, how much IP do you have left? Do you send it back? You destroy them, and all the paperwork you need to archive. Sorry. Because afterwards, when the regulatory agencies come in and say, well, you did a study 5 years ago, and they are seeking now approval for that molecule, we want to inspect to see how that study went, to have a sample of how it was conducted, and make sure that all the information that are in the papers that the pharmaceutical industry submitted really happened in real time. So that's why the closure can take around 4 weeks, a little bit longer, a little bit less. And sometimes you start closing some areas while other areas are still executing, and that's why we put a short period there in terms of closure. So before I go into more details, any general questions that I can answer? I think I'm running okay in terms of time.
What happens to a drug if in the post-marketing there's a problem? Does it go back to a particular clinical phase, or I mean, I guess it depends on the case, but if it wasn't like lethal or anything at that point, if there was just a problem with it.
Very good question. I have one slide about this, but let me take your question now. So I spoke about, so you have from phase 0 to phase 4, and what you're talking about is basically the phase 4 space, which is what's called late phase or real world solutions studies. So as I said, phase 0 to phase 3 are the studies that you do until you submit the application, the dossier, to TGA, FDA, or the regulatory agency, right? And you have probably tested this with 500, 300, 1,000 patients at that stage. And then sometimes when it comes to the market and you test it with tens of thousands of millions, and you say, well, this is actually not exactly so safe as it showed in the results. So sometimes the drug is completely removed. Depending also, it might be removed in one country, might not be removed in another country. And that's why each country have their regulatory agency. I can give you a personal example. My wife is a cardiologist. She's also from Brazil, like me. But to come here, you need to validate your medical degree in Australia, because the type of medicines or what you can prescribe in Brazil is different what you can prescribe in Australia, which is different what you can prescribe in the US. It's not that necessarily it's right or wrong. It depends on the population. For instance, I lived in Japan for half a year, but went there for many years. There, they got very strict, as Japanese sometimes are, in terms of they are very correct. I mean, I love the Japanese culture, but they are very correct in the sense of how they do things. So anything which has a slightly more complication, they investigate it very carefully before they launch in the market, which made it that small piece, or that excess of or not excess, but increased amount of investigation meant that the Japanese population didn't have as innovative drugs as you had in Australia for some diseases, and or that you had in the US. So that brought their TGA or their regulatory agency in Japan to say, we need to accelerate drug development and bring more alternatives to the population, because as a matter of fact, I investigated too much, and actually the population is dying because I don't have new drugs, because I have a bottleneck. So it depends country by country what they do. But for instance, the European Union, you have the European Union itself authorizes or not the medication. MHRA, which is the British one, which is now due to Brexit, they need a separate approval in that regard. They approve their own piece. So it depends country by country how that's done. Any other question? So, all right, so a little bit more about the different stages of discovery and what entails. So, as I said, a bit of the pre-discovery, or the stage 1 there, is to understand the mechanism of pieces. Due to time, we won't go into too much detail in that regards, but it's basically to understand the toxicity of it, and mode of action, and what happens in that space. And this may take, as I said, 3 to 5 years until you discover that in terms of clinical trials. When you do the preclinical data, so 3 to 5 years, that's in the laboratory, right? So you're testing your compounds there. The preclinical studies, you're seeing the dosage of it, how it's metabolized in animals, and before you can go into humans, how are you going to manufacture your product so that it can be in humans? That's what you do in your preclinical studies data. So you need to have all that dossier ready before you go to humans. Otherwise, the ethics committee or the TGA will ask those questions and say, do you have all this done? Show me how that was formulated. Otherwise, they won't authorize to conduct this in humans. So they are the gatekeepers, basically, to conduct the clinical studies. Where else? So then we go to the clinical trial space, which is a little bit of what you alluded to, of the different aspects. And here you can see a bit of what I was discussing about. So you have the phase 0, which has some animal data, and you start to look at humans in either volunteers or patients on how your compound or molecule will look like. If that passes on, you go to the healthy volunteer piece, which has around 80 participants, so you're increasing your data there. if you have positive results, so that may take a year until you have the phase 1s done, 1 to 2 years until you have your phase 1s done. And sometimes some companies say, well, I don't have more funding to do more development at this stage, so they partner with a larger company to do their phase 2, phase 3 studies, because those are the real expensive ones, the phase 2 and the phase 3 studies. As I said, phase 3 are usually global in nature. You have some phase 2s that are also at least a few countries involved in the phase 2 space. So for instance, you have biotechs here in WA or in Australia in general that perhaps do a phase 2 study in US and in Australia. Or you do it, your phase 2 study in a country in Europe and US, depending on which market you are really interested in. And that's where you start to need to have more funding in order to deliver your clinical trials. Then, after you have done your phase 2s, which are around 100 to 300 patients, so just to be clear, phase 2s and phase 3s are only done in patients, just to make that statement there as well. You go for your large phase 3 studies, and it might be that you say, okay, this molecule is working really well, so I will run now a global phase 3 study, let's say across 200 different clinical research units, like linear, but 200 globally across, 30 countries. So you can imagine the amount of investment you need to do that. So you might seek a partner and say, all right, you look for a global pharma company and say, well, okay, if we can do this together, if it works, you get part of the marketing rights and licensing rights for a specific market. Let's say you can license this in China, or you can license this in Japan or in the US, and I have the other markets to do that, and we have a collaboration here together. So you may recall there was BioNTech and Pfizer did the vaccine for COVID together. BioNTech is a biotech company, very small investment, small amount of people, but Pfizer helped them to really scale up their molecule to be global in nature and to be able to provide this to everybody. So again, there are other partnering natures, because those phase 3 studies, they are large, like can go up to especially in diabetes or cardiovascular studies, can be up to, as mentioned there, 3,000 people, 3,000 patients globally involved in those large studies. And this takes, again, another 7 or so years, may take more, depending on the molecule, therapeutic areas. Rare disease, for instance, is something that takes a long time. Then you go even further than 15 years to develop drugs or medication for rare disease. I will skip this slide in terms of specific designs. This is just how its different cohorts are being dosed, just because of time. The phase 3 studies, this is something that I want to speak a little bit more about, the type of studies or the designs that you can have. So you can have randomized or non-randomized studies. Basically, randomized studies is there's a system behind it to say, okay, patient 1 will receive treatment A, patient 2 will receive treatment B, patient 3 will receive treatment C, and patient 4 will receive treatment D, and the system behind it will do all this IP allocation to the different people globally. So you can imagine, if you have a study with 1,000 patients to be delivered, that goes in the background. That's one of the vendors that provides exactly this service to say which patient globally will receive what. So that's basically to determine which patient group gets allocated, and then the data can compare, okay, Rodrigo, you received treatment A, where your symptoms better than treatment B, C, or D, and then you can do a statistical analysis and compare the treatments between each other And that's basically how you allocate that. The other piece that's important in terms of designs is the study going to be unblinded? So you know exactly which treatment you're getting as a patient. It can be that a blue pill or a red pill, or if you have two. So you know exactly what you're getting. It's completely unblinded. And so the physician knows what they are giving you, and you know what you're getting. You can have a single or a double-blinded study, which is a single-blinded is one of the parties is blinded and the other one is not. So the physician or the investigator, as they are called in a clinical trial space, when they give a medication or investigational product to a patient, the patient might not know what they are taking, but the physician knows what they are taking. So the physician is not blinded, but the patient is, and then you have a single blinded scenario. For double blinded is where neither the patient or the physician or the investigator knows what treatment is being given. I remember my sister in Brazil, she had something in the skin, and we went to a dermatologist and said, what's that to do? And the dermatologist said, you don't need to worry about it. And my sister was, I don't know, 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years, and the dermatologist said, you put those pieces that you write in the board, in the old boards. I'm getting old, so I only write pen now, but what's the name of it?
Chalk?
Yeah, in chalk, colorful, but it has to be green one, and you pass there every morning and it will disappear. That's what the dermatologist told to my sister. And my sister, being 4 years old, she did that every morning and it disappeared. Why? That's the placebo effect. So, of course, if she continued her life without doing this, it would disappear anyway. Right? So there is a lot in drug development, there is a lot of placebo effect. There is in the literature saying that 30% of all treatments have 30% of that is a placebo effect. If you believe that this will cure you, it will help cure, definitely. And that's why you need to be completely blinded of what you're giving and what you're receiving, really to show the treatments an efficacy or not. Because placebo effect is extremely strong. Extremely strong. And that's why so many drugs fail. Because when you look at the data, it doesn't make any difference. several times. So then superiority or non-inferiority basically is what the word tells. I want this to be better, or I want this not to be worse than what is in the market. That basically is the third part there in terms of superiority and non-inferiority piece there in the market space. These are the phase 4 studies that you were referring to in your question. So there is a slide about that. So basically, after you have registered the approval and the medication is out in the market, there are still studies being conducted after the approval process to make sure that the study is safe, because that is for sure the most important portion of drug development. So, and those are with thousands and thousands of people, and takes a good amount of years, 2, 3, 4 years afterwards, in order for you to see safety aspects of it. And sometimes you discover something interesting, is not only in terms of safety, but other usages that that same medication is happening in the real world that was not planned, but people have discovered in practicing, oh, this is actually good for something else. And then there are some biotechs or so look at, well, what is exactly the mechanism? Why is that better? And then they start discovering something else. So that's the portion there. Cautious about time. This is probably more for you to read if you're interested, is a little bit of different studies and what they mean. So it's a little bit of adaptive trials, randomized controlled trials that we touched on. So there are some further information here about this. Also observational studies, which are largely the studies in the phase 4 space. You observe what's happening and you get some data in order for you to see what's really happening in real life. And again, those are some information that you can read afterwards. So wanted to touch on a little bit more of innovation, what's happening today in clinical trials before we close the meeting, this lecture. So if we look at pre-COVID, there was already happening a good amount of innovation in the clinical trial space, but the industry as a whole, especially because we are dealing with patients, we are dealing with participants and health, it's a very conservative industry. So while banking or airlines, you can do everything with your mobile phone or mobile devices, it was only in the 90s that we left paper and do some computer templates in terms of case report form and what you capture data in a different form than paper. So while in the other industries this was much faster. So COVID helped with this a lot in terms of saying, well, either there's a risk for the patient to come to the clinic to do all their visits, or we try to do this through telehealth or to other innovative ways. And that's where it flipped a little bit in the industry in the past 5-10 years. There were other companies out there doing this, but it was more acceptable after COVID now, because basically the industry was forced to look at other ways to deliver clinical trials. So the difference between hybrid and decentralized, completely decentralized trials are basically that hybrid studies, some visits, so you do a lot of visits as a patient during clinical trial. Some of those visits in a hybrid study happens in your home or where you want it to happen. So it can be at home, it can be at work, it can be in a mobile unit that goes in front or that passes in front of your house. And some of those visits really happen at the clinic or at a site or a brick and mortar site, like for instance here Charles Gardner, that you go and see the physician. When it's a decentralized trial, all the visits happen decentralized, which means happen at home or where you want it to happen. So you may have some nurses come into your home and do some blood draws, and it depends a lot on the type of study. So you will never have an MRI done at home. That doesn't make any sense, right? But you can do some blood draws, you can do some vital signs at home if the nurses go there and do that. So it depends on the study that you're doing, and there are, as you can see here, Sanofi launches digital clinical trials. So there is a lot of movements in the industry. Apple is doing a lot of clinical research as well in the healthcare space. So there are new players as well entering this space and interesting, contributing in terms of data. Basically, the fundamental point or motivation to do those more hybrid and decentralized trials is that you have much quicker access to data, you have much less patient burden, and you're able to use technology to hinder those. So think about a patient that has a rare disease and want to participate in a clinical trial, but the physician that is a specialist in that area lives 200 kilometers away. So it's a burden for that patient to come to the clinic each visit to have that done. I mean, where will they, if they have children, where will that be managed? They will lose a lot of time. Or interstate. There were some pediatric studies that participants from WA flew over to Queensland to participate in a study, because that was the treatment that would be available. So doing with the technology, you reduce patient burden, you reduce, and you have decisions much faster. because you're looking at the data constantly. Not necessarily cheaper. Actually, most of the times currently it's more expensive. But you have the ability to analyze the data much faster as you progress, and you can make faster decisions. Oh, this is not working. Oh, this parameter, you do some interim analysis, this is not working as planned. So you can stop or continue the studies much faster and stop some of your drug development and refocus your strategy in different ways. You can several times enroll much faster, so you get much more patients faster than you planned. That there is some cost reductions, but the investment you need to do in technology to do that usually don't offset that investment. It's a matter of reaching the market faster, but also, again, as I said, reducing the patient burden and pieces. So you have there some data around how this can be evaluated. So in terms of equity and gender distribution, you can measure that much faster. What am I getting? Only males, only females? For that study, you can do evenly that. What type of race? So diversity in terms of the population diversity, which is something that is very much popular right now. Which age group am I focusing on? And pieces like that. And the retention rate of patients continuing the clinical trials, because it's less burdensome, increases as well, which is a key aspect of this as well. So I know I have only 2 minutes left, so I wanted to share with you what are the options in terms of roles that you can have in terms of different stakeholders. For instance, in a site like Linear, there are clinical research associates, coordinators, leads, project managers, or as myself, executive directors that look over operational and the commercial aspects of the clinic. Pharmacy roles there as well. You can own a pharmacy yourself, you can be a pharmacist. There are 2 main players there in the clinical trial space, which are CROs and pharma companies. And I have listed some of the roles that you have in each of those stakeholders there. So here again, there are a lot of options. If that's something that really interests you, there are a lot of options there in the market, and happy to speak more about those roles. And I'll close off by showing you a little bit of what the patients that goes by Linear tells about participating in a clinical trial, so that you can have also some elements of patients' testimonials of how it is to participate in a clinical trial as well. So I hope I have been able to keep to my agreed 45 minutes. But I'll open up for some final questions, or afterwards, if you want to come up here and ask the questions directly, I'll be here for some time as well. So either way. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Okay. Hopefully it was. Yep. That's yeah. That's fine. Hi.
I was wondering if you do research in infectious diseases, like clinical trials and that.
Yes, we do.
Area?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I'm quite interested and I like to continue doing research in that field. So,
Oh, nice, nice.
I was wondering if there are like interns, you take interns or.
We do take interns, and happy for you to speak with our talent acquisition group. If you send me an email, that's probably the easiest way. If you send me an email, I can direct you to the right person. And
Okay, sounds good. Thank
yeah,
you very much.
you're welcome. Bye.
Question about pharmacy technician. Can you tell me how to be a pharmacy technician, and how does it be like a pharmacy technician? Like, what is the role and job?
Sure. So a pharmacy technician in a clinical trial space, it does a lot of, you remember I spoke about the investigation of products, how they are formulated and how they are prepared. That's what a pharmacy technician would do. So again, do you need it to be unblinded? No, not unblinded. All of that is the aspects of the pharmacy clinician, and they will be liaising with the pharmaceutical company because in terms of drug accountability, how much have you dispensed to the physician, how much is left, what is the expiry dates and logistics, and how much of temperature excursion and all of those pieces are involved in terms of pharmacy technician aspects as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for you.
Oh.
See
Yeah.
you.
See you.
Great. Do you want to take your microphone?
I'm still on.
I'll take it with you.
Yeah.
I have had that happen before. The lecturers walk off with them.
So I need to put it
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I think the students really like sort of.
Yeah, to see what's out there in the real world. That's what we try to.
Exactly, and they're all starting to think about their careers
Yeah.
now because they're, this is their last semester. So.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
good.
Great.
So let us know how we can support more, and
Yeah, absolutely.
happy
yeah.
to do more of those.
Yeah, that would be great. I
Either
mean,
myself, Zelda, or others in the team can come and present. And
yeah, because you're not over in the Perkins anymore, are you? But you're somewhere on camp, on site.
well, we
linear?
we have meetings room in the camp in the Perkins,
Oh, okay, still, yeah.
but we are largely in the B block.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. B block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where we are largely, and our corporate office, where I'm based, is in Hampden Road, 174 Hampden Road. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise there was office space on Hampton Road as well
Yeah.
for linear.
So there is where the head office is,
Right.
or the corporate where I'm sitting, the CEO sits, and the other sits there as well. And then we have a unit up in Joondalup,
Okay.
which has 24 beds. So we have 24 beds here in Charles Gardner and 24 beds up in Joondalup. So those are our units at the moment.
Okay. Good. Good to know.
All right.
All right. Yeah. I'll. Yeah. I mean, if you're happy to do it again, so it would
Happy
be
to.
next
Just-
year probably.
Yeah, let us know, and we're happy to contribute and continue this work.